Alastair Smith-Agbaje, who's the CEO of Future Men. Judith Banjoko, the Director of Services for Shelter. Cynthia Bullock, the Deputy Director of the Healthy Ageing Challenge at UKRI. And thank you to UKRI for sponsoring this session this afternoon. And also Sarah Allan, who is the Head of Architecture and Urban Design at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Thank you all very much for your contributions this afternoon. The format is I'm asking each of our speakers to speak for 5 minutes, giving their reflections on communities and long-term thinking and longevity, and then if time permits we will take a few questions from the floor. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Becky. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here after lunch and in such numbers. And I'm a housing person, so I'm going to talk a little bit about building and building before moving on to community. And I'm sure you're all aware that over the last few governments, housing policy has been focusing on building more new homes to meet housing need. And 10 years ago, in fact, the Cameron government promised 200,000 homes a year and 300,000 by the end of the decade, which is now. And since then, successive governments have made the same promises, and current government aims to produce 300,000 homes a year and 1.5 million new homes in England by the end of the Parliament. Now, I understand the value of a really challenging target like that to, really get people going. But I think most people in the housing world and most people in the public in general think that this number will not be achieved. So Cameron managed his 200,000 target, but nobody before then has managed 300,000 since the 60s, and at that time there was a lot of local authority building. So I also think there is a danger that a challenging target may do more than galvanise people to build homes. It may lead people to make compromises on quality and all the other things that are important about housing in communities. And we know there are examples of this already, so I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of permitted development rights and some of the very problematic housing that's been built that way. But really there's been a bit of a gap in knowledge and monitoring over the last 20 years or so with the homes that have been built in that period. You may remember that in the 2000s there was an organisation called the Commission on Architecture and the Built Environment, which started doing surveys of new housing to look at how good it was from a design point of view and a livability point of view. And they tended to come up with summaries that were really a bit negative. Homes were average or mediocre, or we were storing up problems for the future. And since that period, there hasn't been that sort of monitoring going on across a sample of new buildings. And we can cross our fingers and hope that they are all better than they were in the 2000s, but there's no certainty there. So design issues are a problem. And of course, the last 20 years have been a bit of a lost opportunity in terms of making homes affordable to heat and good for the climate. So we've built some millions of homes over that period which are not up to the highest energy standards, and homes are still being built today that have gas boilers in them that will have to be taken out before the end of their natural lives so that we can move to electric heating and sustainable electric heating for water and rooms. So I'm sorry to start off in this negative way. I think we've got a very challenging target. We're not going to meet real questions about quality. But what I'd like to emphasise is that although new homes are obviously important for meeting housing need overall, if for our concerns, we really should focus on the homes that we already have. Even if the 1.5 million target is met, we already have 97% or so of the homes that there will be at the end of the target period. And we should focus on the 97%, I think. So thinking about ageing and longevity and what older people need from housing and communities, my view, based on all the research that I've done, is that older people need the same kind of housing and communities as everybody else, but we don't all get what we were hoping for. So people, people of all ages may not be working, they may not have a car, they may have mobility needs, they may want to contribute to preventing climate change. And people of all ages need homes that are safe, comfortable, affordable, easy to run, in areas that have got all the basic amenities, good accessibility, and some kind of social life and social support. So I think that's a cross-generational need, and it always will be. Now, how are people who are older doing at the moment in terms of their housing in communities? Generally, people over 65 in England are the most satisfied age group when it comes to satisfaction with their homes. The majority of them are in outright ownership. Most of them have decent homes. They tend to have spare bedrooms. They're slightly concentrated in certain parts of the country, but there hasn't been any trend. It's not sort of any process of ghettoisation or anything going on. So in some ways, the picture looks quite sunny. But I've got to say, the available statistics don't really cover all the experiences of home and community, those things I've just quoted to you. And there's a lot more about people's responses and people's detailed needs that we really need to look into. And even reassuring data does hide or hide in plain sight quite serious problems. So, for example, a majority of people over 65 have decent homes, according to the Decent Home Standard, and the proportion who have non-decent homes is no different from any other age group. But that still means there are about 1 million people in England over 65 who are in a non-decent home. And that's wrong for any age group, but perhaps particularly wrong as you're moving on in life. And there are some other problems we need to think about. So a growing number of people who are middle-aged and older in the private rented sector, and so far there's been a lot of thinking about how that's problematic for children and young people, young adults. But of course it's more difficult if you're coming towards the later stages of your life and you're going to want particularly security because your peers will be staying in their homes for a long time at that stage of life. So we need to think about the private rented sector. We need to think about all the people who don't have money to maintain their nice owned homes, or who have mobility problems in and around their homes, or have too much or too little space, and those people who are lonely or unsafe at home. And just to give some examples there of how we've got mismatches and problems going on. Most wheelchair accessible homes in the UK are lived in by households with no wheelchair user. Most wheelchair users live in a home that is not wheelchair accessible. So there is something for policy to do there, and clearly you could think about building more of those homes. You could also think about redistributing. And if you look at people's needs to be able to be at home with health problems and convalescing, and that's a bigger use of home in general as the population ages. But nearly 500,000 extra days in hospital were consumed last year because people were waiting for nursing and personal care and places in care homes and nursing homes. But nearly as many were lost due to the lack of domiciliary care. So that's people coming around to the home to provide care there. And 50,000 hospital days were used because people didn't have adaptations to their homes that they needed. Okay, I need to wrap up. I just wanted to say building homes can make a big contribution, but there are lots of other things that need to go on. And for a more targeted, immediate and certain approach to meeting the needs of an ageing population, we should think about helping older homeowners with that maintenance and improvements, helping those who want to downsize, increase funding for adaptations at home, increase funding for domiciliary care, and appropriate useful technology, not the kind that grandchildren usually suggest to their grandparents, because that's not always perfect, and of course support for social and community activities. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Becky. Oh, apologies, we seem to have an odd...
Oh, that was a big reveal.
Judith, would you mind?
Of course not.
Taking over? Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Just testing, no, it's not working. Hello? You can all hear me. So I'm Judith, Director of Services at Shelter. My pronouns are she, her. And thank you very much for having me here today. And I've heard over lunch that you've had an amazing morning, so it's really great. So thank you for being here. Next slide, please. Next. So I'm going to cover these 4 areas: housing age population, the needs of ageing tenants, and fixing the PRS, and building more social homes, which, as we've just heard, is the only solution that's going to be needed. Next slide, please. So I think if anyone wants any of these stats, Shelter are brilliant at rolling out stats, so please do email me and I'll pass these on to you. But we saw a significant and disproportionate increase in the number of older people qualifying for homelessness assistance in the English local authorities. I mean, it's gone up by some 51% increase in the number of applicants over 55 years receiving that homelessness assistance. And there were over 40,000 applicants. And this really is a stark change from the 21% rise across all other age groups. So what does it tell us? It tells us that our older population are facing homelessness at a much faster rate. Next slide, please. So we've got a telephone online advice service, we call it TOAS for short, and from January 24 to December 24, in 1 year, it showed that over 55 used Shelter's online advice service. I think it was something like, nearly 5,000. And the main needs were to keep their current home, to actually stay in the home that they're used to, in their community, with their support networks and their families and their familial support. And finding temporary accommodation, which again speaks to the fact that there are more homeless applications now coming from older people, and helping to improve their financial situation. Just the ability to be able to stay in that home was another major key factor that people were calling for. And the one that isn't on there, which I question, is disrepair, which is a big thing that comes up across, not just with older people, and it goes back to what our colleague, Professor Becky Tunstall, was saying around the damp and mould, things that are actually killing people staying in the home, and that affordability to actually heat your home. Next slide, please. So again, another statistic, because we love a statistic. So since 2010 and 11, the number of 55 plus households in the private rented sector has grown by over 80%. So again, it's where older people have got to go. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They can only go to the private rented sector. From Shelter's 2024 cost of living tracker, 7 in 10, that's 69% of private renters over 55 were struggling with their rent, and that goes with what we're seeing in the day-to-day in our hubs and on our telephone advice line. Nearly 48% of private rented sector tenants aged 65 or over in the bottom 20% of all household incomes, and that's because they're relying on a static pension in many places. So if the rent goes up, there's no additional income to pay for it. Next slide, please. So, sorry, I keep looking around in case I'm reading from the wrong slide. So we're looking at the needs of ageing tenants. An analysis by Independent Age found that older private renters were keen to stay in their own home and their neighbourhood for as long as possible. And it's because of that familiarity with their environment, access to their friends and families, and access to services and amenities. Long-term tenancies would better guarantee that security of their tenure. But what we need really is stable rents. Older people, like I said, are living on a fixed income, sometimes pensions, which make it a lot harder to afford the rent and afford rent increases to that rent. So almost half of older people who rent privately are on housing benefit, so less able to respond to increases in costs when the benefit isn't, when housing benefit is frozen, so they can't actually afford to stay there. And then what happens? They have to move. There's an increased likelihood of living with a disability or long-term condition, meaning that older people may have specific accessibility needs. And as we've heard, there's not always the properties that are equipped and made for that. So older renters need long-term solutions because the ability may decline and they would like to stay in their home. Next slide, please. So again, we're looking at the focus is mainly on the private rented sector because that's where we're seeing the largest increase. And it's, like I said, it's poor insulation, there's fuel poverty, we all know we're going through a cost of living crisis, and there's disrepair. So older people are living in unheated, dangerous homes. Private properties have poor insulation, and what happens when you've got a limited income, you pay your rent, and what doesn't happen is you don't pay fuel bills, and those the things that you actually need to survive and live a healthy life. And this actually puts more pressure on the National Health Service and other areas. There's also poor accessibility, we've already said. For example, many of the properties that people are in won't be step-free. You might need like steno lifts, for instance, or the outside of the property, you may need lifts to get to those upper floors. There's the lack of extended family housing options. A lot of private rented housings don't provide large enough family homes. Therefore, if, for instance, my kids wanted to invite me to live with them, it's unlikely, I wouldn't be able to go because the house is too small, essentially. So there's that as well. And there's, again, it comes back to that unaffordability. Shelter did a piece with the BBC which really highlighted that older people who are at retirement age and actually would want to retire can't. They're actually stuck in that private rented sector and they cannot afford to retire, essentially. And then rent increases for this group, that's tantamount to an eviction. You may as well just say, get evicted. And what happens? They have to uproot, and you have to go to another area. So one of the things that Shelter are looking at is to unfreeze the local housing allowance to make renting more affordable. Next slide, please. So here are some of the solutions. Renters' Rights Bill. I think Shelter's been very forward with that, and it's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really improve the rights for renters in England, and that can be delivered through the Renters' Rights Bill. There's rent stabilisation, the opportunity to stabilise rents within a tenancy, and that is still on the horizon. This would be really beneficial for elder private renters, as it would mean there would be limits to the rent increases for those who already are in a tenancy, meaning rents that they pay cannot rise unreasonably within a given period. And one of the big ones as well that we find a lot within Shelter is end discrimination. Income discrimination is a major factor for private renters, especially those on benefits. You know, you frequently see the sign, no DSS, and those properties are not available. Additionally, older people wishing to rent a property with dependents, you've got the no family conditions as well on a lot of properties. And older people as well are subject to wider discrimination, and that includes race, gender, sexual orientation. So we must really push towards an end to discrimination on all renters. But I suppose I'm not sure if is there another slide after this? No. Okay, so back. Sorry, you'll have to go back. I suppose if we're looking for solution, it's probably going to be the big one for Shelter is build more social homes. And this brings me back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs that I studied many, many years ago. And at Shelter, we recognise that we need 90,000 social rent homes a year for 10 years to end the housing emergency. And I do agree with my colleague in terms of that's not the only solution. There has to be wraparound services around that as well. You know, it's about, I think that's the first start to make sure we actually have enough social housing. Local planning, again, needs to identify local housing needs, and that includes the type, the size, and the tenure. Social homes that need to be adaptable and ideally already accessible to meet those current needs. There needs to be an investment and a commitment from government to build social homes that our communities need, so everyone, including seniors, have a decent, safe and genuinely affordable home. Thank you.
Thank you. Zoe, may I?
Oh,
Zoe,
yeah.
may I come to you?
Yeah. Thank you. God, this is fascinating. Really enjoying the panel so far. So I'm Zoe, I'm an Assembly member. So for people who don't know what the London Assembly does, it's 25 people that exist to hold the Mayor of London to account. So we don't have any decision-making powers. Our powers is through scrutiny and influence and looking at the Mayor's manifesto and making sure that he's delivering what he said he's going to deliver. I've got a background in the NHS and in local authorities. So I worked, I've got some echo going on. Is it all right? Okay. So I've got a background working in the NHS and in local authorities, and I was a public health commissioner as well as a children's health commissioner, and before that, health policy and adult social care. So this is something that I deeply care about in terms of addressing inequalities. But I got into politics because I guess I wanted to look at kind of systems change and those bigger levers. So I want to talk a bit, I really compliment what's been said already in terms of recognising that we are in a housing crisis, but that means very different things to different people. And we've often seen that that's given cover for building high-rise luxury flats and homes for profit and not for people. I was at a conference, launch of a report yesterday by Inclusion London. They're a deaf and disabled people's charity, so I hosted them in City Hall, and they released their Barriers at Home report, which I'd encourage everyone to have a look at. And it's really in the voice of disabled Londoners talking about the chronic lack of accessible homes in London and the impact that that has on their ability to access their kitchen, access their bathroom, live a life. And if we're talking about engaging with communities, it definitely starts at home. But they also talked about the fact that the London plan, which is meant to be the blueprint for London and drive targets and deliver the homes that we need, has a target of 90% of all new accessible, for all new homes should be accessible or adaptable, 90% of all new builds. So you're like, great, excellent, 90%. Do you want to have a guess at how many have been delivered? 3%. 3% is what their report found. And I just think that really shows the lack of accountability and the fact that if you have a target and an aspiration, but no way of holding people to account. So I definitely think within the descriptions that we've heard already about the need for social homes, we absolutely need to be holding developers to account. They also expose the fact that people don't know about their local communities, so there's no data. Boroughs are often depending on census data and not actually on population need. Councils don't have any information about their stock, so they couldn't tell Inclusion London how many homes are accessible. So we actually have no idea how many homes are accessible. So I think what their report really highlights is that we need to talk about affordability, but we absolutely need to talk about that coupled with accessibility. And I'm going to be taking that forward with them through the Mayor of London to challenge the Mayor of London. I was going to talk a bit about some of the other things I do on the Assembly. So I lead for housing and planning for the Green Group at City Hall, as well as policing. But obviously we could talk about policing of older people, but I'll stick to housing and planning. But a lot of the stuff that I do is around what I say is anti-displacement and keeping communities together. So keeping people in their homes. So supporting lots of what Shelter was saying around the need to address the crisis in the private rented sector. And I'd say the Renters' Rights Bill needs to go further and have rent controls, because I think without them it undermines the security elements of the Renters' Rights Bill. And I held a rent commission, got a report coming out tomorrow about what renters were saying about how we could make a rent control work in London and how the Mayor needs to call for that devolved power to set London's rents. Because we know the impact of that is on separating communities, people not being able to live and work in the city, and just the absolute change that we've seen in London and who London's for. And then the other bits I do on what I call anti-displacement is around challenging estate regeneration, which has often resulted in communities being displaced, people not being able to live near or anywhere near their support network. There's research that shows that social rents increase after an estate regeneration. So it's kind of sold to us that it's going to result in more social homes, but actually it's less social homes. The rents go up and most people don't return. So I'm working with a couple of estates around London to challenge that. And just to extend that to communities, I'm really passionate about London street markets. I think they are our absolute I love our street markets. And I was actually at Ridley Road Market this morning buying my fruit and vegetables, and they were telling me that predominantly the amount of people that come to Ridley Road are the older generations, and the fact that it's culturally important to them, it's a social space, But actually markets are under threat. The land that they're on is incredibly valuable. It's often, councils are under pressure to build housing on that land, and it completely misses that these are really important spaces for communities. So I do think that the kind of planning and housing elements do need to be kind of closer linked, and a lot of what we talk about in the Green Group and generally is around devolving as much power as possible to residents to make the decisions about their own lives. So I guess that runs through as a theme for all the work that I do. But I'm looking forward to answering questions and getting into discussion. So thank you.
Alastair, over to you.
Thank you. Test. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Alastair. Great to hear from everyone so far. Paul, just click through the slide because I'm coming from a slightly different angle, from the sense of when you don't have created spaces, these are the impacts it has on our young people, our fathers and so forth. So the organisation I work for is Future Men. We're in this building, and we pride ourselves on supporting boys, youth, young men and fathers. And just as my colleagues have shared, when you don't have that significant space, there are impacts in school and so forth from what we do. So we have 3 strands of work that we do. So Paul, just click through what we do. You've got the 7 characteristics. This is what we build around, what we deliver in schools and with our Fathers Team program. But basically, our work is centered around schools from year 6 upwards. But obviously, we start from year 0, because if you're a future father, you're going to be in a maternity ward with your partner, and we would provide training around how to bath a baby and so forth. Some of the challenges that we see are lack of spaces, or we have youth hubs where we work with young people, boys and girls and so forth. We have 2 youth hubs at the moment, one in Pimlico, one in Paddington. Often what you'll find is the youth hub itself, or youth club in my day, that's what I used to call it, it looks like a prison. I said to one of my colleagues, this hasn't changed from when I was a young man, and I'm 54. So I'm talking about a long time ago, but I said, why is it that we haven't created those improved spaces to make it almost attractive for our young men, our young ladies and so forth to be a part of that environment? Because obviously we see what's happening on the street with our young people, with the crime, the antisocial behaviour and so forth. But if we create dedicated spaces that encourages young people to be mentored and go through the various programs that we offer, that's going to halve a lot of the issues that we have. Some of the challenges that we find so we've got a boys development team working in schools, as I said, from year 6 to upwards, and we also have a fathers team program. And some of the challenges that we see from young people that are excluded from schools is overcrowding at home, not having the appropriate facilities to thrive with their studies and so forth. If there's a dispute at home, there's not an adequate space for them to go, and that adds to the work, obviously, for the teachers at school. So when we come in there's probably a misunderstanding with that young person that they're being rebellious, and at some point, which is very often, they're sent to a pupil referral unit, which is not great. So you're battling with all of the issues that my colleagues are talking about when you don't have that creative space, when you don't have that area that looks nice and so forth. We're coming in at the end where people are struggling in those areas. So our work is really to provide the support for the fathers, the young people in those programs to thrive, but also to create those spaces. So we are working very collectively with local authorities, philanthropist organisations to provide those spaces, to make them improved and to make them accessible so that people can thrive and develop and so forth. And I think when I look at our program, we've been existing for 20 years. Some of the young people that are old men like me say that, well, when we were in this space, this is what we had that made us thrive. We had that mentoring, we had that creative space that made it, we were able to have fun, but most importantly, we're able to learn. And I think if we're lacking those spaces where overcrowding is becoming such a massive issue, it's going to have a knock-on effect on the delivery of what we do and what we see in society at the moment. So probably my question is, which we're looking at the moment, how do we resolve that? And I think for us as a charity, we're working with the landlord authorities, the local authorities and the housing associations on the estates that actually provide those centres where people could share their frustrations, but also share opportunities of how we could improve those spaces to allow our young people, particularly our young boys, to do well in their school or whatever they move on further to develop. So that's some of the challenges that we face, but there are successes as well. And I think as a solution, what we're looking at as a charity is, well, how can we widen the opportunities to collaborate? Because I feel that we're a charity that we turn over 1.2 million or whatever it is. We need more support in what we're doing because we feel that there's a gap missed in other areas of London. We want to become a national charity because we see the disparity in so many other places around the UK, and this is what we want to improve on. And I think in a minute I've got left, it can work. I lived in Japan for 5 years. I've got a Japanese baby, she's 22 now, but I also, so not so young. And I lived in Norway, and one of the things that I always pondered on is that, well, how are these societies so successful? The family's key, but there's a community ethic. And if you've got those spaces that allow people to thrive, it does work and it can work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alastair. And Cynthia, I'm going to pass across to you now from UKRI.
There we go. You hear me? Nobody wants to hear their voice that loud. So thank you for the invite to be part of the panel. It's always quite nice when you're slightly later on than everyone else, because hopefully they've set the context so I don't have to go over all of that. So I work for an organisation called Innovate UK. As the name suggests, we are the UK's innovation agency. No? Yeah. You heard earlier on, innovation is going to save us. I'm a firm believer of that. And hopefully, what I'm hoping to do is say a little of what we've been doing and the ways that we think that the work that we fund might address some of the issues that I think our esteemed panel has very clearly laid out. So Innovate UK, as I mentioned, was largely set up to support business-led innovation, and we make that distinction because we want to separate what we do from what research councils do. We are part of a larger organisation called UK Research and Innovation, which comprises the rest of the sort of academic funders, so MRC, BBSRC for those, ESRC, all the RCs. Over the last 5 years, together with the Economic and Social Science Research Council, Innovate UK have been delivering the government's £98 million investment in healthy ageing. Fortunately, that completed last year, so we are busy trying to put together whatever the bid will be for the next SR period. Very excited about that. I thought I'd get that in case someone calls me later on and says, can I have any money? I haven't got any more at the moment. I'm looking at you, Ian. So I wanted to use my opening statement to just sort of highlight my insights. As I mentioned, it stems largely from the knowledge and the experience we've gleaned over the 5-year journey of delivering the Healthy Aging Challenge. And we've been really excited by how that movement and that program has energized the whole community of innovators and researchers across multiple academic disciplines, across multiple industry sectors. And I think that highlights the complexity in healthy aging. It isn't just one thing. When we set out to do this, we looked at, in fact, helped and supported by the Centre for Aging Better, looked at the kind of 7 key areas, we called it, that innovation was required. And it really spanned everything from how you support someone with physical activity, but also how you look at the built environment and housing adaptations, as well as cognitive health and social isolation and loneliness. We know is a huge issue. So for us, it was great to have people coalesce around the vision of how do we enable people to be active, to be independent, to be socially connected, and to be productive. So work and work in later life and health at work was a really key aspect of what we wanted to do. I'm hoping to share with you some examples, and this is literally some examples of the 240-odd investments that we made in this space. So hopefully it's beneficial and it highlights some good impact we've been able to have in the area of sort of building communities Right, so the first one is Blackwood Homes and Care. It's a social housing provider in Scotland. I thought I'll make the case for the devolved admin as well while I'm here. And is really excited. They're combining a sort of new design of attractive, affordable and accessible housing with a range of place-making innovations that create vibrant neighbourhoods that people want to live in. So the Blackwood Home, as it's called, can adapt as people age, enabling individuals to live independently and socially connected within that neighbourhood for longer. They have a digital system called Clever Clogs, which is customizable. It's a tablet device, but it can design and support people within their health and with their health and well-being goals. They've also added a smart meter linked to AI that can monitor interventions and energy usage to know where relevant interventions might be needed. And that will track everything from patterns of behavior to make sure that they can predict when someone needs help. And the great thing is this is delivering value across different types of tenure, which is great. And from our perspective, and more exciting, that is helping those with the greatest inequalities. We really set out to look at the social gradient of the investments that we made. And that was because we recognized that there is a lot of solutions, but often it's those who can afford it that benefit from it. And so this is about how do you create and design something that's still attractive, but it's affordable to the masses, right? So design it once and multi-generational use and intergenerational use. So that's my first example. The second one, I'm going to Wales. Told you I was flying the flag for the devolved admin. This is a social venture project that was led by Bron Afron. They created a senior co-housing model. So they had a community of private homes clustered around a shared space that enables people to live together but apart. And the idea is that it brings all the people together into communities where they share facilities and decision making. They are providing solutions that they hope will enhance people's well-being. The idea is that it's reducing loneliness and isolation and promotes activity and engagement. Is it just me? Is it coming?
You'd hold it steady, just
okay. And then partly because I think others have made the case that you can't talk about building communities without reflecting on the housing stock. I really like the point that Becky was making, that actually most of the houses that we need is already in existence. Most of us here are living in houses that we are going to grow old in, and we know that those houses are not equipped and do not have the right quality to support age-friendly, let alone dementia-friendly, right? And often the adaptations that people use are so medicalized that it's really unattractive. I had Chris Whitty talk once, and he said, if I wanted to buy my son a bike, I have a plethora of choices. It's definitely not me, it's coming in and out. But if I wanted to buy my mum a Zimmer frame, I've got one colour, grey, and it's ugly, let's face it. My mother-in-law needs a walking stick, and she's refusing to use anything currently on the market because she's an art connoisseur. She loves, she's vibrant, and she wants something that reflects her nature and her personality, and that's just not available. So that, for me, was one of the things that was really attractive about what we were doing. So it was the inequalities piece, but how do you make it attractive so that people want to engage with it and make it acceptable? So the two last solutions I wanted to talk to you about is about our Deshka project, and the full name is Designing Homes for Healthy Cognitive Aging. And the idea is to go beyond the current narrow concept of age and dementia-friendly design to a much more expansive and inclusive approach to housing innovation. They are supporting people in the local authorities, in third sectors, to really think about how they make design, age and dementia inclusive in an attractive and affordable way to future-proof some of those homes. We also worked with the energy giant E.ON, and a lot of what they were working to do was to deliver home improvements alongside their commitment to extending energy efficiency. And they were really looking at what are some of the things that you can bring in that are attractive, supportive, but don't scream, I'm an old person, I'm vulnerable, I need help. And so they worked with things like early morning schools, systems to help people understand maybe when things needed to be turned off in the kitchen, like the gas, or when there were energy usage needed to be looked at, so that they could again intervene early enough to be able to address any issues. They were also providing people with Fitbits to support physical activity, as well as functional grab rails. But these grab rails looked like everyday objects, so that it didn't necessarily scream, again, I needed help. And you could put these in bathrooms, in kitchens, alongside walls. One of them I thought was really attractive because it doubled up as a flower pot, but you could also support it. So you didn't have that long grey line that you often see in front of other people's homes that screams, this person needs help. And then I guess I just wanted to finish with a couple of reflections of the projects that we saw that were successful, what the key elements were. So for me, the first was a kind of undeniable knowledge that actually there is social but also economic value in tackling the major challenges and opportunities that the aging population presents. So you're not doing people a favour. It's good business to think about the way that the population is changing and therefore tailor your solutions and your products to be able to address that market. The second is about ecosystem, and I think others talked about it. How do you foster collaboration across multi-generational, across multiple industries, across multiple academic disciplines? Because you need all that infrastructure to support you to develop solutions that everyone can engage with and sees a role, because they all have a role. I think there's a role for individuals, but equally there's a role for the institutions and the services that deliver products and services within a local or regional area. And then the final thing is to embed the views of people with lived experience. I think someone talked about earlier on that one of the disappointing things about the report that came out was that it had the NHS at the centre rather than the person at the centre. We need to get back to the part where we build services around people, accept that there is a balance around the kind of individually tailored solutions with aggregating that kind of population health element, because we know we can't afford to personalise everything. And I'll leave you with a quote that I got from the Housing Lane report, which is places succeed socially and economically when the people that live in it, so its citizens, are happy to live there.
Thank you. And Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I'm going to finish with just a few insights into some of the thinking and work that we're doing in the department, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, in relation to design and placemaking and the planning system. And I think it's just really important to understand first, thinking about where we build and who builds our home. So the government, as some of the panel have talked about already, have been very clear that about increasing the supply of homes, but also they've talked about delivering more than just the status quo in terms of the quality of design. But when we think about who builds our homes, so the majority of our new homes are built by large house builders, and where they're built, well, they're built on greenfield sites. It's also worth remembering that 9 out of 10 of over 65s live in mainstream housing. So if you sort of put together those statistics of where a lot of people are living in terms of development of new homes, I think that gives us some food for thought. Return to a point actually that Becky made, or a piece of work actually that Becky referred to. There was a housing quality audit that was carried out in 2019 by Place Alliance, and they showed that actually the audits carried out 10 years before by CABE, there was very little improvement, in fact barely any at all. And they showed that on these greenfield sites built by large house builders, development was at a low density, car dominated, that we're baking in inequity because of where we're building. So schemes were scored more poorly the further they were from the urban core, which I think sort of leads us to thinking, well, where can design play a role in all of this? Well, Matthew Pennycook, the Housing and Planning Minister, has been really clear that design is absolutely vital to delivering the public benefits that people expect in order to be able to welcome development. But also in terms of the quality of places, that means that we need to build at higher densities, to use land more efficiently, to be able to deliver the amenities that we need. So supporting us to be more sociable, creating opportunities for more physical exercise so we can walk to the shops, the parks, having streets that feel safe and welcoming. And in the recent planning reforms, we have set out those aspirations, but actually taking it further, setting more clarity about the standards we expect, and pushing much more in terms of having a plan-led system through local plans, and stop having this conversation about weighing up cost over quality. This idea of prioritising viability over sort of long-term quality of places is something we need to change. And what's very clear from reading the Older People's Housing Task Force report that was published in November is that if we consider the needs of older people in relation to greenfield development, so where we build the majority of homes, we would design those places quite differently. In fact, first of all, we would probably not build them there at all. In fact, almost certainly, to make more sustainable places, you need land in proximity to different modes of transport. But we would be building at higher densities, you'd have more mixed uses, but also you'd think about people's needs in relation to their health and well-being, as well as their mental health. Some of the things that we are doing in relation to this, we're updating our National Design Guide and National Model Design Code, firstly to make it easier to use, to consolidate some of the information that we have in different places and different planning practice guidance, but also being more explicit about design requirements that we expect to see, including on different types of sites, for example, greenfield sites and small sites. We're reviewing the guidance in terms of thinking about the needs of older people much more, and we're bringing the needs of people to the front of the guidance, because actually what is clear is that we need a much more people-centred approach in how we create places, and actually understanding place from the perspective of people rather than from sort of more abstract requirements, we think will be able to start a change in our mindsets of how we approach design. And I just wanted to end by really that I think it's important that we sort of bring in evaluation as well as celebrating design. So we are going to commission a new national housing audit next year. obviously depending on the spending review outcomes, but I don't think what we're asking for is in the order of magnitude of some of the other programs. So hopefully we will be able to do that. But I think that's really important for sort of benchmarking quality, and even though I suspect that the results may not say anything new, it's really important that we continue to build this evidence that quality does matter. And finally, on the point of celebration, well, one of the privileges of my role is that I'm a judge on the Housing Design Awards, which is a very long-running award, in fact established by the previous Labour government after the Second World War, to really celebrate the quality of homes and health. And over the last couple of years, there have been some fantastic schemes that have shown the quality of homes that can be delivered for older people. One of them was New Erswick in York, an extra care home and housing for over 55s that was a prize winner. John Morden Centre, in Greenwich, won the Sterling Prize. And finally, the winner of winners for last year's Housing Design Awards was the Appleby Blue Arms House in Bermondsey, which I have to say, I go to see lots of projects, lots of different places, but it's always really heartwarming to go to a building and feel your heart leap, not only because of the humanity of the architecture, but actually the pride of the clients, the architects, but most importantly, the residents in where they live. And I think we shouldn't forget that.
Thank you so much. It's been fantastic hearing from the panel. I think you've identified not only some of the challenges, but also it's been great to hear about some of these solutions as well, which is what this conference is all about. So very many thanks for that. Ladies and gentlemen, sadly time is against us, so we won't be taking any questions or answers.